Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. It's Thursday morning at 10:47. So yeah, I want to thank again. Got some new subscribers this week, and a lot of people have been commenting on these videos, and I love that to death. I got recommended a couple of movies this week that I had not seen. And so that's one of the things that I love the most about this channel is being able to interact with other film fanatic maniacs out there. So very, very cool. Appreciate the love and support. And I uploaded actually two videos this morning. So check those out. One is on the latest Clint Eastwood movie, Jury Number Two, with Christopher Holt, and it's actually a pretty decent movie. It's not fantastic by really any stretch of the imagination. It's definitely flawed, but I was into it. I the further I sat with it, I got into the story more, and I wanted to see what was going to kind of happen. And it's a courtroom drama, but it's got a really great cast. Tony Collette is in it also. So there's a really, really great cast. And so, sometimes that obviously, doesn't make the movie, but sometimes when you have a cast that is really great, it can be, obviously it causes an exciting dynamic. One movie I think of where it doesn't really hold together is Copland with Robert De Niro and Harvey Keitel and Ray Liotta. So many great people and great actors in that film, but the story and everything just gets it's got this real ham-handed delivery, and it gets very predictable, and it gets to the point where it's just kind of unbelievable, and the writing isn't very good. But with this film, Jury Number Two, it's got some really bad dialogue, and it does feel like a TV movie, and in a way, for kind of all the wrong reasons, because I do love TV movies, but it does suffer from some pretty bad, real generic dialogue. But that being said, I stuck with it. I found that the story itself was kind of interesting, and I was like, huh, okay, this is actually pretty decent. So I put up a video about that film. It's the latest Clint, it was the most recent Clint Eastwood movie. I think he just turned like 95 or 96, which is just insane. Yeah, so check that out. And I also did a video on John Carpenter, the master master of horror that he is. He just got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and so there was a big presentation about a week or two ago in Hollywood with that, and Kurt Russell was one of the speakers. So I was like, yeah, I should do a little show just about John Carpenter, and one of the greatest horror directors ever, of course. And I wanted to just kind of talk about him and the significance of him really being recognized by the industry. So check that out. That's a little bit of a shorter video. So keeping them cranking here. And I'm working on some things. I'm working on now currently is I am fingers crossed. I'm working on setting up an interview show with someone in the industry that I really, really respect. And I'm not going to really say too much more about it. It's still, everything still has to be, solidified. But if it does get confirmed, fingers crossed, and we can set everything up, I will definitely make an announcement about the show. Very, very excited if it happens. So stay tuned for that. So this leads me to the main topic of today talking about one of the most notorious films in the horror exploitation world. It has one of the it has a legendary reputation around it for the kind of the shocking nature of the film and just how low down and nasty this movie is. And it's one of those films that like you hear hyped up, you hear talked about all the time. I do hear this movie mentioned all the time, especially when it comes to folks out there really into the horror exploitation world, Italian cinema, all those kinds of things. And that is Dr. Butcher, MD, aka Zombie Holocaust. I talked about this movie probably a couple of years ago. I think I did a show a couple of years ago, but I just watched this again last night, and this is one of the best. It's kind of one of my most prized possessions that I own in my collection. I have actually a really long history with this film. I've seen it. I've had it for a few years on Blu-ray. I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times. It's one of those movies where it's just so damn good that I'm like, why don't I just watch this like every week? It's a Severin release. Severin, of course, one of the premier, one of the best boutique labels out there. This package is just absolutely incredible. The transfer of this film on Blu-ray is absolutely stunning. There's 2 discs. There's I believe there's 2 different versions of the film. There's a theatrical cut and then a director's cut. There's there's hours of special features on this in this collection, and it's just amazing. There's interviews left and right from everyone involved with this film. It's one of the most impressive Blu-rays I think that's ever come out. I think it's one of my favorite of this is definitely one of my favorite horror exploitation movies ever of all time, and it's definitely one of the best and most beautiful and complete editions that I've ever that I own in my collection. It's such an awesome movie. I bought this probably about 3 or 4 years ago now. I got it used. Like most of the movies I end up buying at Bull Moose are used, but I will say that a lot of the movies I've bought more recently are brand new. They haven't been opened, but the prices at Bull Moose are just pretty spectacular. You really get, I mean, especially for this. This was like, I don't know, $20, but you get so much stuff on here. It's unbelievable. You get more than your dollar's worth with this beautiful, beautiful edition. Thanks to Severin, because Severin is, one of the best labels out there that puts out all kinds of great trash movies like this. And yeah, and again, so much to talk about with this film. It came out in 1980. It's it was directed by Marino Garillomi. Uh, Essentially an Italian film. And when you look it up online, it says the languages that it comes in, or the dialogue, the language that's used is English, Vietnamese, and Italian. But it's essentially an Italian film. The only thing is there isn't. I mean, I have to I'm going to be watching the other disc. There isn't an Italian version of this film, at least the version that I watch, which is last night I watched this movie and I watched the uncut version. And I believe it was the uncut version. And there isn't an option to watch it in its native language. And I believe it was shot in Italian. There's a lot of American actors and Vietnamese actors in this movie. It's kind of a multicultural cast. This version is dubbed in English, but it's still like shocking and amazing and just completely entertaining as all hell. It's totally fucked up and it's just wild. It's and there's two versions of it. I believe when it was it's under two titles. When you look it up, when you look up Dr. Butcher MD, there's two titles: Zombie Holocaust and then Dr. Butcher MD. And I think that is due to that there's a it was a distribution thing when it was released in Europe and then when it was released in America, I believe it was under I could be a little I could be wrong, but I don't think I am, but correct me if I am in the comments, anybody out there. But I do believe it was released in Europe as Zombie Holocaust, and I think when it was released in the States, it was released under the name of Dr. Butcher MD. But there's two different versions of the film on here. I'm going to check out the other one and make my way through all these special features because they're just absolutely incredible. I watched all of this stuff a few years ago, but it's been a while, and so it's going to be kind of a new experience. But this movie is just yeah, it's a masterpiece, and it's truly every now and then you get those movies out there that get a certain reputation over time, and it's like you go and you actually see the film and you're like, well, maybe it was it's a little bit overly hyped, and it's not quite as insane as people have been saying. But in this case, with this film, it's completely true. Everything, all of you know, the shocking things that people have said about this film, it's legendary and it's all true. I think it's spot on, and then some. In all honesty, the other thing that's really amazing about this whole package, this whole Blu-ray collection, I mean, you got just amazing artwork. You have the original, or I should say the American version of the artwork for Dr. Butcher MD. Got that on the front here, and then it's got the Zombie Holocaust artwork inside with this bonus disc, two discs, and all kinds of cool stuff in here. But the coolest thing is because this film has always had this reputation as being just super fucked up, super gory. It comes with a vomit bag, which is so badass. Like, and it actually has a warning that this film can induce vomiting. I mean, that's pretty fucking amazing right there. So yeah, I didn't get sick. So it's funny because I have this weird. Well, from when it comes to shocking violence and you know sexuality, lots of gore or whatnot, I have a pretty high tolerance for those kinds of things. Certain things will push my limits, I guess. Like I'm not, it's hard for me to watch a film where there's maybe like a pretty brutal like rape scene. Like that's pretty hard to get through. Not into like seeing animal cruelty. Not fun. I mean that was an unfortunate thing sometimes because of there not being any protectionary laws. But in some early exploitation movies, there were animals that were harmed. I'm not a fan of that. I don't own too many movies that have that as part of the movie. Luckily, but anything else, I like having my limits pushed. I like having my cage rattled a little bit. But when it comes to a movie, especially this movie, I need to like. I don't want to be shocked just for this for to say I'm getting shocked. Like I need there to be for the sake of being shocked. I need there. I have like basic requirements of like, well, I want there to be atmosphere. I want there to be a world, like this feeling of world building and escaping to this world. But there has to be a pretty good story and some good characters. Like that's I still feel like that's got to be the main thing. And then the gore and the practical effects. I always feel like with a lot of films, for really great films, is comes secondary, and where you have a pretty good script, pretty solid script, or a really good script, and then you have some really great atmosphere, and then the gore, obviously. And I'm all about the practical effects, and this is one of the greatest. I mean, it's got some of the goriest, things ever captured on screen. As far as, just insane. You have to kind of see it to believe it. It's just amazing. And again, I can imagine. Well, I did have this experience, and I'll get into that in a minute. But for me, it's got a movie's got to have that vibe to it. It's got to have a good story, or at least a really good kind of atmosphere, and maybe some humor. What have you. I'm not a big fan, which is a thing that happens in horror films, and there's definitely examples of that, where some horror films will just have extreme shock as the only kind of selling point. And I get that. I get that. But it's also, for me, it's pretty obvious when a movie doesn't lacks those main qualities and is trying to make up or cover its own ass by just putting extreme, violence or gore in the film to try to make up for not really having atmosphere, not really having, a good or solid story, and various other things. I mean, to me, it's like pretty obvious when that happens. I think one movie that is an example of that, that, and I have things to say about this film or franchise that I think that are positive, and that I think are great. But it's more the way I look at it is I look at it. There's more in the negative. There's more checks in the negative column for me. But that an example of what I was saying before, a movie that really, because it lacks those basic ingredients that make a movie good, it tries to overcompensate, with the gore or whatnot. And I think the Terrifier films are, or I will say I haven't seen the other two. I've only seen the first Terrifier movie, and I know there are three of them, and there's going to be a fourth one. And I am not a fan of the first one, in all honesty. I've talked about that before, but I feel like Art the Clown, the main character in that film, the murderous clown, he is he's a pretty ominous character. I think he's got some commanding presence when he's on the screen. But I feel like the movie itself, Terrifier itself, I thought that movie was so hyped up and so talked about by everyone, where people were saying that this is, the most brutal movie, the most gore soaked, the most bloody, and the best, horror film in decades, and all of these things, and and I watched it when I finally sat down and watched Terrifier. I was like, it's yeah, there's a lot of extreme gore and violence and torture in the movie, which yeah, I can get behind that, but I felt like everything else lacked. Like there was no tension in the movie. The everything was forgettable. There was no atmosphere. There was with the characters and the storyline. I just felt like it was just wicked bland. If you took out, and I just felt that movie just. I know the director. I can't remember his name of those films, but his background, I believe, was in practical effects. So he, brought his, experience and talent to that film, and he's obviously very good in that technical department because the gore in that movie is brutal as fuck. I will say. I mean, the gore is super sadistic, and it pushes the envelope. But I couldn't get. I remember watching it one night. It was like a year or two ago. I sat down and watched Terrifier, and in a moment I was like, "Yep, this is pretty shocking, pretty violent, pretty over the top. Okay, cool." And then finished it, and I was like, "Okay, yeah." And then the next day, I totally like forgot everything that I saw, and it was just kind of this. Um, I just felt like it was this empty kind of vessel of a film. It was very shallow. Like it had the extreme gore, it had all of this heinous violence, but there was no again there was no. I felt like it had no substance. It had no atmosphere in the film, and I just couldn't get over. I couldn't understand why everybody and their grandmother was just like, you know, just freaking out and saying, what an amazing film this is, and it's the greatest horror film in decades, and it's this whole thing. And I'm like, really? Like, it was so hyped up where I was like, come on. And then I know there are two other films that have come out, Terrifier 2, Terrifier 3, and I might see them someday, but I honestly don't have any interest in seeing those movies. And the good things about what I said, that I think about that movie, I think Art the Clown is a pretty compelling villain, but he's literally the only thing that stands out in the movie. Between the protagonist and antagonist, tension, and representing those things. There isn't any. There's no atmosphere. But I think the good thing is like those movies were, all of those movies are incredibly low budget. A lot of those films were financed by fans themselves, and it, you know, in a lot of ways, it truly is, an independent film, and by every stretch of the imagination, and it made a shit ton of money, and it put these guys on the mark, and on the map as independent filmmakers, and I want to see people who work outside the Hollywood system to be successful, but I also want the product to be good, and I want, I felt like it was also equivalent to my experience around Terrifier was like going to an amusement park, and like, you have all of the crappy food, you know, steak and cheese sandwiches and cotton candy and, deep fried Oreos. When you go to a big fair, there's all this like really shitty food, but yet it tastes really, really good, and you eat it, and in the moment it's like great and satisfying, and then the next day you feel like shit, and you're like, why did I do that? And that's, yeah. So anyway, but when I want a movie that has got a good story, amazing atmosphere, I'm all about the atmosphere at the end of the day, and really great gore and violence. This is it. This is the shit. Like, this is it. This is what it's all about for me. Dr. Butcher MD, aka Zombie Holocaust. And I don't understand too. The other thing that irks me is there's like a couple of YouTube people out there that, well, one guy in particular. I won't really say his name. Um, Nick Cody. Um, no, sorry, Cody. Oh, shit, that's not his name. Anyway, I shouldn't say his name, but he's a massive YouTube guy out there, and he does mostly horror reviews. Oh no, sorry, it's Cody Leach. Fuck it, I'll just say it. Cody Leach. He's a very smart guy, I think, in a lot of ways, and I think I watch his channel a lot of the times, even though there's like times where it drives me crazy, and I it kind of makes me angry. But I watch his channel because he does capture, or he does talk a lot about new horror films. And I like to, again, my world is, these decades, this came out in 1980, 70s, 80s. That's my decade or decades. And Coda Leach does talk a lot about slasher movies and and covers those things. But his main thing is he talks about you know modern contemporary horror films. So I like to try to stay grounded in that world and keep my finger on the pulse of that world because I love all kinds of cinema and all kinds of films. But for instance, like he was one of those guys that was a huge guy that talked so much about how amazing the Terrifier films are, and just has raved about them. He's dedicated multiple episodes to this film and to this franchise, and and that's fine. That's totally cool. But the thing that irritates me about him is that like, you know, he'll even say like in his reviews, like when it comes to say a film like Terrifier or any of the Terrifier films, that it's like, basically like this modern day slasher, exploitation, really low budget, gritty, and super nasty horror film. And I will say that that movie and franchise obviously was very very much inspired and influenced by these kinds of films. The classic horror exploitation movies in the 70s and 80s, like of course, and of course the slasher genre, which is my favorite genre. But and the Terrifier movies have been out. I think the first one came out maybe 4 years ago, and they've there is a third one that came out around last year Christmas time. So each year there's been a new movie, and there's going to be a fourth one, I believe. And he'll like rave and rave about that movie and saying that it is this kind of modern day slasher exploitation movie, but he won't acknowledge the film's influence or give these movies the fucking time of day. Like he won't even mention these movies. He'll like the times that he has, he'll like just dismiss them, and he won't like. You got to give credit where credit is due, because I really think without directors like Lucio Fulci or Herschel Gordon Lewis and Mario Bava and you know the list is endless. Jess Franco, a movie like Terrifier wouldn't fucking exist, and that he won't even. He'll just be dismissive of those films in its entirely in its entirety, and he will not even acknowledge it. And I'm just like, dude, really? Like these guys were doing this shit fucking decades before anything that's coming out now. But whatever. Amazing film. This is a gore-soaked masterpiece. One of the greatest. Dr. Butcher MD, aka Zombie Holocaust, 1980. It doesn't get any better than this. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.